Willie takes a big hit, and then he hands it to me. So from the mid-1990s till about 2007, I used to do a lot of work at a studio called the Sound Kitchen in Franklin, Tennessee. It was an amazing facility. They had 5 studios, and pretty much anything you could ever want was at this studio. It's great. I got to know the staff really well because I was there all the time, and Sharon Corbett, who was the studio manager, was just awesome. She would always make sure that we had everything that we needed, and didn't matter if I was working with an indie artist or a major label artist, she always just took great care of us. So she would pop in once in a while and say hello and ask how things were going. And one day she came by and she walked in and said, "Hey, I need a favor." And I said, "Sure, what do you need?" She said, "Well, how'd you like to record Willie Nelson for a couple of hours?" And I was like, "Yeah, that'd be great, Now, Willie Nelson had been at the Sound Kitchen for a couple of weeks working on an album, and this was his last day there. Apparently, an old friend of his, a producer, legendary producer by the name of Bob Johnston, had booked Studio D next door, and when Willie was finished with his day, he was going to come in and sing a duet with this girl that Bob was producing. And apparently the engineer, I don't know if he flaked out, if he wasn't booked, I don't know what the situation was, but she said, "I need an engineer to fill in and do this. Can you do it?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm in. We're good." So she left the room, and I turned and looked at my assistant, Matt, who was freaking out because apparently he was a huge, huge Willie Nelson fan. It was kind of funny, actually. So we walked over to Studio D and walked in the door, and there's Bob Johnston sitting there and about 9 other people. He had an entourage with him. Bob's kind of an eccentric guy, very interesting. So we sat down, and Matt and I proceeded to get ready for the session, and I started talking to Bob, and he had some great stories. He'd worked with Willie Nelson and Johnny Cash and Simon and Garfunkel and all these cool people and had tons of great stories. So we just kind of sat there while the party raged on behind us with the entourage. It was very, very strange. So we waited, and about an hour and a half later, a guy walks in, and he looks just like Willie Nelson, but it's not Willie. He had the braids and everything. I mean, he dressed like him. I don't know if he was his assistant or his decoy or what, but he had Trigger, which is Willie Nelson's guitar. And he proceeded to walk in and tune it up and get it set up in the ISO booth. And Matt's over there freaking out, going, "Oh my God, that's Trigger," Again, pretty funny. Now, again, this was Willie's last day, and he didn't have a ton of time. So after he finished his day, he was going to come in and knock these parts out and hop on his bus and head back to Texas. So eventually, Willie walked in, and Bob stood up and gave Willie a big hug, and I guess they hadn't seen each other in a while, and put out his hand to me and said, "Hi, my name is Willie." And I said, "Hey, I'm JR, and honored to meet you." And Willie said, "All right, well, let's hear this song, let's hear what we're doing." So we sit down at the console. Willie's on my left side and Bob's on my right side, and I hit play on the tape machine, and we start listening down to the song. And Bob starts telling Willie, "Well, there's a couple of spots I want you to play guitar and sing." And so about halfway through, Willie looks at Bob and says, "Bob, this isn't the song you told me. I didn't learn this one, and I don't have time to learn it now, and we're going to have to do this another time. Bob, why don't you fly up to Texas, and we'll do this at my place in a couple of weeks." Bob, I could tell he was bummed, but he said, "All right, we'll do that." At some point, we're sitting there talking, and Bob reaches down and pulls out a joint. Bob lights the joint, takes a big hit, hands it to Willie. Willie takes a big hit, and then he hands it to me. I had a decision to make, I was like, well, do I get high with Willie? But I said, "Man, thank you. I appreciate that." I said, "But I've got to get back to work next door. I'm mixing a contemporary Christian music artist, and it might be kind of odd if I show back up stoned." And he laughed and said, "Yeah, that'd probably be a bad thing." So he turned around and handed the joint to somebody in the entourage with the party that was going on behind us in the control room. It was very strange. And so we talked for a little while longer, and then Matt finally got up enough nerve to ask Willie for an autograph. It was a really cool moment, Willie smiled and signed a piece of paper for him, and I stood up and shook his hand and shook Bob's hand and said, "Guys, this is an honor. I wish we could have got something done, but it is what it is, and I got to go back to work." So Matt and I left the room and walked into Studio C and sat down and just kind of laughed. And Matt looked at me and was like, "Did that just really happen?" And I said, "Yep,